consciousness in every activity of hers and has been an exemplary role model for the congregation. We all know Mataji's enthusiasm is so contagious. When it comes to service, Mataji is the first person to raise her hand. There is no service without her involvement. She genuinely wants to serve the congregation. She cares for the welfare of the devotees. And we are so fortunate to have Mataji as part of our congregation and have the opportunity to associate with her. So thank you so much, Mataji. Without further ado, I will hand it over to Mataji for today's class. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Gopal Chandra Prabhu, for that very kind introduction, for which I am not worthy. So I'm actually going to spotlight. Jai Hare Krishna. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining the Sunday program today. There is so much happening in the world in general that it means a lot that you all have chosen to take time on this Sunday to be here and listen. So hopefully we can share something that will be of value and benefit to everyone. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen here. Are you all able to see my screen?
Yes, Madhavi.
Good. Thank you. So today we're actually going to be talking about freedom of speech. This topic has been in the news a lot in the last couple of months, for sure. It has been, media has been talking about it, about how their speech is being suppressed. You have people who are protesting on the street because they've been speaking for so long, but people have not been listening to them. Yesterday, I think it was yesterday or the day before, two of the famous leaders of the civil rights movement, both of them who advocated for freedom of speech for African Americans, passed away. And freedom of speech has just been such an integral part of our life. People, we cannot even get through a single day without actually talking about how freedom of speech is being impinged. So what kind of inspired me to pick this topic was some incidents that happened recently in current affairs around the world that particularly dealt with this. So one incident happened a few days back, I believe. Robert Unaiu, who is the CEO of Goya Foods. If you don't know what Goya Foods is, there's a picture there. They're very famous for producing Latin American and Hispanic canned foods. You see them in any HEB you go. So the CEO recently at the White House, he made a statement where he praised President Donald Trump, and he commented about how lucky we are to have him as our leader. Naturally, this statement that he made caused an absolute outcry in society because people were upset because of statements that the president has made in the past, which were derogatory to the Hispanic community. And they felt that as somebody who himself is Hispanic and someone who's representing Hispanic culture should not have said that. The CEO came back with a very interesting viewpoint where he said, well, I had praised President Obama as well. Why was this backlash not there? And then this idea that as a person, it's my First Amendment right to have a freedom of expression. And, those of you and we'll talk a little bit more about First Amendment, but US Constitution says that there should be freedom of speech and the government cannot tell anyone what to say and what not to say. So he was like, it's my freedom of speech. Julian Castro, who is from San Antonio, and he was running for the presidential election, whom Democrats said earlier, said that he's right. Robert Unaiu is right, that it's his right. Similarly, everyone who's protesting against him is also right. So that really got me thinking that how does that work? Because when we're saying freedom of speech, if I'm going to say something, that's my freedom, but somebody else is also free to say this thing. But sometimes what they're saying and what I am saying may completely contradict with each other. So how do you know what's right then if there's two contradictory opinions? For me personally, this article was very fascinating because the CEO stood his ground and he did not cave to people saying that he should publicly apologize, at least until now. He hasn't apologized. And initially my reaction was he should, but then I'm like, you know what, he's right. Like, it's his right. He can say what he wants to say, but it got really murky for me. while I was dealing with understanding this particular issue on who's right, or like, are both parties right and are they justified, there was another news that happened in India. So a comedian called Agrima Joshua made a joke about Shivaji, who is a very famous leader from Maharashtra. And she made a derogatory joke, as many comedians do sometimes. And this resulted in a huge backlash for her. And she apologized, but even after her apology, there were people who were attacking her, trolling her on Twitter, and who also started giving death threats to her. And there was a particular gentleman who put a video up on YouTube where, he was publicly telling that he was going to assault this woman. So again, comes down to freedom of speech, right? Was she justified in making a comment about Shivaji, which was derogatory? Was that her freedom of speech? Or is this man who is planning to attack her for something small that she said is his freedom of speech? When you look at this incident, which is a far more scarier situation than, to be honest, what's happening with Goya Foods here in the US, it really makes us question, like, what do you mean by freedom of speech? How is this relevant? And like, how do we understand who's right and who's wrong? And it gets very tricky, right? Like, was she wrong or were they wrong? And to be honest, I think both were wrong in this situation. But legally, they both were exercising their freedom to speak. So it gets very, very tricky. And is that fair that both of them were allowed to invoke their freedom of speech in this situation? According to our Constitution, this is the American Constitution's First Amendment. The Constitution clearly says that the Constitution of the government cannot prohibit someone from preventing what they want to speak. The Constitution is making it available so that whatever everyone says is acceptable and it's inclusive. So that made me very confused actually. I was like, so is every opinion justified? Is every thought that I have in my head, I should be able to vocally say it, whether it's good or bad? Because according to the law, I can't be punished for my opinion. But yet we see people are punished all the time for opinions. People are punished all the time for their statements that they make. Sometimes even when they make the right statement, they're punished. So it's very contradictory. So this all got me kind of thinking, how does freedom of speech work really? Now, I'm giving a Sunday feast class today. This is not a political, current affairs, news discussion. So how does this apply to us? And that's really the focal point of this class today. Everyone is entitled to their opinion, and everyone is entitled to share their opinion because that's what the government says, right? Well, what happens is in a society where everyone is free to share whatever is in their head, it is going to result in chaos. So, I always, we make sometimes with the older teenagers, we make this joke that, we wouldn't talk to you if you had an Android phone, because those of us who have iPhones really value our iPhone. And if you have an Android, I don't want to talk to you, right? Now, it's a joke. We make fun of it. But imagine if that opinion took to a whole different level where all of the Android users wage a war against all the iPhone users. But this has happened in society. The reason Holocaust existed is because Hitler voiced his opinion. He made his opinion heard. He exercised his freedom of opinion and made a point public. And that resulted in mass human genocide. Millions of people died. Millions of Jews died for no reason, just because of a man sharing his opinion. So this is why it's confusing, because if you share every single thing that's happening, it is going to result in chaos in this world. And opinions have potency to divide, right? That being said, if any of you here have Androids, I still like you. And I want to be able to do service with you. So I'm not judging you for your phone model to decide whether I'll do service with you or not. So Vaisheshika Prabhu quotes this author of a book called Four Agreements, Don Miguel Ruiz, who compares that these words are like seeds that implant themselves on a person's mind and heart. So that's the power words have. We spoke about what Hitler did. You look at the positive side, we see things like what Mahatma Gandhi did. Like my father often would say, Mahatma Gandhi would make one statement from a corner of his jail cell and the whole country would listen. No Twitter, no Facebook, no phone, nothing. Mahatma Gandhi said, reject, foreign-made clothes everywhere, right from Kashmir to Kanyakumari. They were burning their clothes. From Bengal to Bombay, they were burning their degrees. They were doing all of this. That was the potency of a powerful speech, because speech or words we say have so much of potency to implant in our minds and heart. And when one speaks with the motivation to injure or undermine others or just speak whimsically, like we are at these seeds that actually planted start becoming poisonous, and they create weeds within our heart. And that is what we see today, that free speech is being abused to actually say things that are hurtful, that are damaging people, that are undermining people, that sometimes even said casually can hurt somebody. And we see this happen every single day in our lives. Sometimes we are guilty of doing that too, like just saying something knowingly or unknowingly hurting somebody else. And so speech, the power of speech is so powerful, right? And they say, sword, word is mightier than sword. Imagine word when spoken from a mouth. How much of power and potency must be there in that? So we agree here, hopefully we've all baseline and established on the fact that speech is important. Speech is powerful, but I also have a freedom to speak what I want to. So how does all of this get rationalized? The other part of speech that was interesting is you see in our own Shastras, in Srimad Bhagavatam, description of what happens when speech goes wrong, right? We're not talking about, karmi pastimes, we're not talking about current affairs, our own Srimad Bhagavatam. So in the first picture, that is from Chitraketu's pastime that is described in the 6th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, that once when King Chitraketu was in Kailash, he sees Mother Parvati and Lord Shiva embracing each other, and Chitraketu laughs. He doesn't even say anything. He just laughs. And Mother Parvati is so offended by that, she curses him to be a demon. Now, what happened there? He exercised his freedom to laugh, and she exercised her freedom to curse. Who's right and who's wrong? This pastime, to be honest, terrifies me, because I wonder how many times have I been whimsical with devotees, not intentionally, not intending to hurt them, but just being whimsical. But this is the result of it. This is the result of sometimes unknowingly being whimsical. He was cursed to become a demon, and he appears as Vritrasura. Obviously, now Krishna took care of this, because Chitraketu was a pure devotee of the Lord, that when Vritrasura comes, even though as a demon, he's such a pure devotee. In the pastime of Indra and Vritrasura's fight, when it's about to end, and Indra just cannot fight Vritrasura, Vritrasura gives Indra instructions. Radhika Raman Prabhu in one of his classes describes that actually every Veda describes this fight as Indra as the hero. But Srimad Bhagavatam describes Vritrasura as the hero. The demon is the hero in this story because he's actually a devotee of the Lord. But coming back to this point, like he exercised his freedom. He laughed, and was he wrong in laughing? I don't know. Was Mother Parvati wrong in cursing? I definitely don't know. So how do you understand who was right and who was wrong? I mean, the other famous pastime of where two people spoke to each other, and it's hard to gauge who was right or who was wrong, is Jaya and Vijay, right? Were Jaya and Vijay wrong in stopping the Kumaras from entering the Vaikuntha to see Lord Vishnu because they didn't know who they were? Were they wrong? Or were the Kumaras wrong in cursing them to be born as demons for that action, right? Both parties exercised their freedom of speech, but it was confusing, like who was doing the right thing and who was doing the wrong thing. So when we look at all of these pastimes, it becomes tricky, like what should I be speaking and what should I not be speaking? Because this idea of freedom of speech actually is maybe more dangerous, because if I can speak whatever I want to speak, that's a problem. So freedom of speech is almost overbearing. It's interesting that whenever we are presented with any sort of thing that we can do completely in free, it actually is scary, because anything done in freedom without any regulation causes a problem. Gauranga Prabhu in his class so beautifully talks about this, where he said once, imagine, and this class he was giving in the UK, I think. So he said, imagine you're, in India. He clearly clarified, imagine you're not in India. I'm sorry. He said, imagine you're not in India and you are in a city where there is a very structured traffic system. He said, imagine if the street lights, all the traffic lights were removed. How would people drive? It'd be just chaos, right? Like, where we live, we have a stop sign if you're on the way to the temple on Great Oaks. And if any of you have driven it, I mean, it's chaos with just a stop sign. Like, people don't know who to turn. It's so confusing. Imagine if that didn't exist also. Like, the society would just be distraught, right? But he was saying that you don't hear people complaining. Why is there, most people, Why is there a traffic light? Why is the government trying to impinge on my freedom to drive by putting a traffic light there? Nobody says that, because a regulation helps us with our freedom. So this aspect of regulation helping us with our freedom is described in our First Amendment as well, which is the first verse of Upadeshamrita. Rupa Goswami in his first verse here so beautifully talks about freedom when he says, Vacho vegam manasa krodha vegam, jihva vegam udarapapasta vegam, etan vegan yu visaheta dhira, sarvam apimam prithvim sashishya. So in this verse, Rupa Goswami is so beautifully saying that a sober person who can tolerate the urge to speak, the mind's demands, the actions of anger, and the urges of the tongue, belly, and genitals is qualified to make disciples all over the world. Here, Rupa Goswami is telling us that the actual qualification to become a leader is not having freedom, not having unchecked freedom. It is being able to tolerate, it's able to regulate what you speak. It is able to regulate your urges. That is true freedom. When I first read this and thought of this with respect to our idea of having freedom to speech, I thought this was contradictory. Like, wait, Rupa Goswami is saying, it's just modern society is saying that we are a developed nation, or we're developed, or we're successful when there's freedoms. But here Rupa Goswami is saying that actually we're successful when we regulate. So I'm like, this is odd, right? It seems contradictory. Fortunately, Krishna himself resolves this contradiction in the Bhagavad-Gita in verse 264, where Krishna says, Raga dvesha vimuktaistu vishayan indriyais charan atma vaishya vidheyatma prasadam adi gacchati. He says, but a person free from all attachment and aversion and able to control his senses through regulative principles of freedom can obtain the complete mercy of the Lord. Regulative principles of freedom. And I thought that was fascinating how Krishna uses regulation and freedom in the same place. That means that if we're able to regulate our activities, that is when we're truly going to become free. And this illusion of freedom that we get is actually not freedom. It is more of a hassle. But when we regulate our freedom that we get, we're able to actually get the most value in this. There was this movie I had seen many years ago. It was like a Hindi movie. I think it's a Nasiruddin Shah movie. I don't remember the title, but he basically gets an inheritance. His father, who dies, gives him like tons and tons of money. And he says that he's only going to be qualified for that inheritance if he can spend 1 crore rupees in a day or something like that. And in that, what he can spend, he puts stipulations that you can't spend on this, you can't spend on this, you can't spend on this, but you can spend on like so and so. The movie shows how difficult now, if we think about it. Imagine if someone came at our front door and said, I'm going to give you $1 million. And you know, all you have to do is spend $500,000 in one day. Or I'm going to give you $1 million. All you need to do is spend 10,000 in one day. Would be like, awesome. I can do that so easily, right? Yay, thank you. But actually in the movie, it goes to show how difficult it was for him to spend money. And not because he was a good human being, that genuinely it was hard for him to spend money. So this idea of just getting money all the time didn't make him happy. There was no happiness in that. So freedom doesn't necessarily equate happiness. Freedom doesn't necessarily mean we can do whatever we want to do, because society is showing us that we can't, just because we're free doesn't mean we can do what we want to do. So better for us to go into this approach that Krishna is recommending here, that actually better to follow a life where you're regulating your freedom, where by practicing regulation of freedom, that is when you're truly going to become happy, truly get the shelter of the Lord. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in his commentary on this particular verse, stressed on tolerating the urge to speak, which is the theme of our class today. He stressed on this urge to speak, and he said that if this urge is not controlled, it results to enmity and animosity and many problems in this world. And we see that. Now, there's a reason why Rupa Goswami's, there's a reason why Vachovegam is the first word of Upadeshamrita. Because of uncontrolled desire to speak, there have been so many problems in this world. So many, forget the world, in our own life. In our own life, if we are to take a lens at our life and look at problems that have happened in our life, situations that were caused because we spoke something that we probably should not have spoken, we can see what speech can do and why it's so important to learn how to control this speech. one of the things when it comes to speech is that why it is also dangerous is because one of the things that we like to talk about is we have a tendency to criticize others, right? That's one thing we like to use our tongue for, and this is a hallmark of material consciousness. In Srimad Bhagavatam, when Sukadeva Goswami is describing qualities of Kali Yuga to Parikshit Maharaj, he talks about this. He talks about like one of the qualities of Kali Yuga is people have a tendency to backbite and they have a tendency to criticize. This is a symptom of Kali Yuga. So this exists in all of us. This is a part of our nature. And there is like this very like odd, subtle pleasure that we sometimes feel in like gossiping or saying something about that person, right? But it's subtle. Sometimes it's inside. We may not know it, but it's inside. But this is so destructive. So if we are actually careful about using our freedom of speech the right way, majority of our problems will be solved. So with that was my introduction for the class. I promise there's a verse in the Gita coming up. So we'll get into Mangalacharan and we'll get into the Gita verse for today. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurudmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Tam Sajivam Sadvaidam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha kalpatarubhyasya kripa sindhubhyo eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Before we get into the verse, I want to express gratitude to a few people that have helped me with this class. So a lot of the content for today's class has been taken from two Dandavat articles. Well, yeah, multiple Dandavat articles actually. One is by His Holiness Bhakti Rasamrita Maharaj. I can share the link on Zoom after this. It's a 7.5-minute video on like 5 elements of good speech, which we will discuss today. And a lot of the content has come from an article Vaisheshka Prabhu wrote about good speech. But there's another person I want to actually express gratitude to, and he forbid me from doing this, but I'm exercising my freedom to speak right now and actually appreciating him. So when Rupsagar gave his class last time, and we were discussing about what classes he should give on, I had told him that he should give a class on this verse, the verse we're going to do today, because Rupasagar has shared before, and he actually shared this when he did his Gita summary, that this is the verse he'd like to get tattooed on. So I had to actually ask his permission that, hey, is it okay if I speak on this verse? So he very generously agreed to let me speak on this verse, and he provided me the resources that I could speak. So I'm very grateful to my husband for foregoing the verse that he wanted to give class on, so I could give class on, because there was no other verse I could think of that was more appropriate for today's topic. So today we're going to be reading from Bhagavad-Gita 17:15. We'll just do the Sanskrit and translation now, and at the end of the points I have to cover, we'll do the purport. It's a very small purport, but you'll understand why I want to do the purport in the end. So this is 17:15. Anudvega karam vakyam satyam priya hitam chayat swadhyaya abhyasanam chaiva vanmayam tapa uchyate. Translation: austerity of speech consists in speaking words that are truthful, pleasing, beneficial, not agitating to others, and also in regularly reciting Vedic literature. Austerity of speech consists in speaking words that are truthful, pleasing, beneficial, not agitating to others, and also in regularly reciting Vedic literature. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna actually talks about 3 different kinds of austerity. He talks about the austerity of body, mind, and speech. And when he is describing this austerity of speech, he's actually telling us how should we speak properly. Sridhar Maharaj comments that these elements of speech that are listed by Krishna actually constitute speaking in the mode of goodness. When we actually try to inculcate these practices in our life and try to follow this austerity of speech that Krishna is recommending in the Bhagavad-Gita, it actually helps us improve relationships with others, because this gives us a yardstick of what to say and what, more importantly, what not to say. So Sridhar Maharaj very beautifully talks about how this will help us improve our relationships, and Bhakti Rasamrita Swami expands this point to Sridhar Maharaj, where he says that if we continue to speak based on these guidelines that Krishna has given, it will help us grow in our Krishna consciousness, but it will also help us build communities around us of love and trust. Because if we speak the right things, it is so beautiful to speak the right things. Our philosophy is not about Manavrata. And in the purport, and we'll discuss this shortly, the purport of Nectar of Instruction, where it says Vacho Vega, control the urge to speak, Prabhupada very clearly says, well, we're talking about the urge to speak mundane things. We should be speaking other things. So we're not meant, like, there's so many philosophies and branches of Sanatana Dharma where people just stay like silent for the rest of their life. No, we're not expected to stay silent. I mean, I know certainly I cannot stay silent. I'll drive myself and everyone around me crazy. So this gives us guidelines on how do we regulate our speech. So this verse in the Gita is a nice help to our first amendment of spirituality, which is Vacha Vegam. So this actually tells us how do we control our speech in a very practical way. So the first point that comes is Anudvega Karam, which is speech that is not agitating. Agitation of the mind happens all the time. It sometimes has nothing to do with speaking itself. Our mind by nature is agitated. Arjuna, that is why when he tells Krishna, when Krishna is talking about mind control in chapter 6, Dhyana Yoga, Arjuna says, Chanchalam himana Krishna pramati balavatitam. Like, his mind is chanchal. It's like the wind. How am I supposed to control this wind-like mind, Krishna? Like, the mind is agitated all the time, right? And when we stop and think how small things agitate us, like it's not like big agitations that happen. It's like tiny things, right? You know, I joke, those of you who know me, like I joke, like I get agitated sometimes the way my husband loads the dishwasher. Really not something to get agitated by, but it causes that, right? It's like small things that cause agitation. Now imagine how much agitation bad speech can cause. Like when someone is speaking something, already your mind is agitated. And then you're adding a voice or commentary to that is more agitating. It is completely going to destroy your life. And you know, last week, Vaikuntha Balaji Prabhu spoke about how, he quoted when he shared the class on the verse, Vyavasayatmika buddhi ekeha kuru nandana bahushaka anantascha buddhayo avyavasayana, about how someone whose mind is irresolute in purpose, their intelligence is many branched because they're not able to focus, right? So imagine you're adding to somebody's already irresolute mind by your speech. It is very, very detrimental. So the first principle here is that whatever we speak should not be agitating to somebody. And we'll be very cognizant of that, especially with devotees. Like we should try not to speak things that can agitate them. Because the problem with an agitated mind is that it's a domino effect. Like just because you have an agitated mind, it doesn't mean it's just my mind that's agitated, right? Your agitated mind automatically affects your intelligence. It starts to affect your senses. It starts to affect how you behave with people around you, with yourself. Like mental agitation is such a big problem. And society doesn't help us. Everything around us is designed to make us more and more agitated. So if there is one thing we can control is what we speak. So let's try not to speak things that are causing agitation in somebody. This is the most basic principle of good speech, is to not speak things that are agitating. The second is truthfulness, satyam, that we speak things that are truthful. Dharma, this morning we were discussing this with some devotees on dharma, how, dharma had 4 legs before, and of austerity, mercy, cleanliness, and truthfulness. And by time Kali Yuga comes, 3 of those legs are destroyed. And the last leg on which dharma is standing is truthfulness. So it's literally the last leg of dharma. And it is said as Kali progresses, it's going to be truthfulness will decline more and more and more. And we are seeing this in society today. Truthfulness is it's a rare commodity, but it's still there. And we have an option to speak things that are truthful. This is very hard actually to do, because on a daily basis, so many times we tend to say white lies. It happens all the time. Because this class is on broadcast live on Facebook, I cannot share all the white lies I have made, but make them all the time. It could be small stuff. It could be big things, right? But our culture, it's like somehow saying not being truthful is accepted. But it's actually not good at all, because if the foundation of dharma is truthfulness, and if that's a one quality that we're struggling to do, then what else is there, right? So it's very important for us when we're speaking with each other, to be as truthful as we can. Krishna values truthfulness so much. He values when someone is being honest, and that he wants to, if you say something honestly, you desire something genuinely, and it's an honest thought, Krishna provides for it. And Srimad Bhagavatam, when he appeared as Nrsingadev, he says, Satyam vidhatum nijavritya bhashitam, vyaptim cha bhuteshva akhileshu chatmanaha, adrishtaya dhuta rupam udvan, sambe sabhayam namrigam namanusham. Satyam vidhatam nijavritya bhashitam. Just that first line is so beautiful. To prove the statement of his servant Prahlad Maharaj was substantial, he appeared. Just to prove something, because he wanted to make sure that no one ever said that your devotee is not truthful. That means, think how much love Krishna has for devotees who are truthful, right? Now, sometimes if he says something truthful, it has a potency of agitating somebody's mind. Let's be honest, right? Like, for example, I want to see who I can pick on, whose camera is turned on. Sorry. Okay, I see Vaikutesh Babaji Prabhu's camera is turned on. Sorry, Prabhu, I'm picking on you because your camera is turned on. Now, if I make a statement saying, Vaikutesh Balaji Prabhu, red is not a color that suits you, it may agitate your mind, it may not agitate your mind. But I don't need to say that then. If I know that may agitate your mind, I don't need to say that. Prabhu, I'm just kidding, that your shirt looks very good on you. I'm just picking on you here to prove a point. So sometimes speaking the truth can agitate people. So we have to be very careful to know that, is my speaking the truth beneficial or not? And that's why the later qualities of speech start becoming very important. Very often what happens in this verse, and it's a very common mistake, is we look at it individually. Like, Krishna said I should speak the truth, so I'm going to speak the truth all the time. Any truth that I want to say, I will say. But actually, that's not the case, because then Krishna continues to explain that you should still be pleasing. You should still say things that are beneficial to others. So we have to be very careful what we speak. Just because something is truthful, we have to gauge, should I be sharing that or not? Is that truth? What is the purpose of the truth for, right? If that's going to agitate somebody, it's not really beneficial. It's not of any value. It's not going to do anything. Then what is the point, right? So we have to really think about even truth, that if speaking the truth, which is unpleasant, better not to speak at all. So we have to be very cognizant of what this situation is. And this is why Sangha is very important, is this having a safe space where you have relationship with somebody, that even if you know something is truthful, that you should be able to ask them, like, hey, I feel like this is something that I strongly feel, and I know I'm being honest, and this is the truth. Do I share or do I not share? And in the association of like-minded devotees and senior devotees, you find out, is that something you should share or not share? So this idea of sharing something truthful, something satya, comes in place of association of devotees. The third quality of speech is priya, pleasing. This is important, because whenever what we want to say to someone has to be pleasing in nature. It has to be something that is pleasing to them. We don't do enough of this. Pleasing sometimes is just saying something appreciative. We don't do enough of this. And that is why, many devotees in particular share this feeling of being underappreciated. I heard in a class of Vaisheshwar Guru once, like, talking about how that, sometimes devotees are like vessels, like when you appreciate somebody so much, like it actually gives you that overflow of that appreciation makes that person want to appreciate. Appreciation is so important that we should be speaking things that are pleasing. We should want to make another person feel happy in life. Our goal is not to hurt everybody. Our goal is not to, put somebody down and to criticize them all the time. Our goal is actually to say something good people. And to say something, and it's not just about saying something good for face value. So it's not like, oh, Mahasundari said that you should say speech that is pleasing. So I may think that this person is really bad, but I'm just going to tell them on their face, oh, you're so nice, Prabhu. I'm so honored to be in your association. No, it's actually, this is affecting our own internal heart, that we should look at all devotees equally. We should have love and care and compassion for all devotees. And we should feel that when we're appreciating somebody, that it's a very genuine appreciation, that speech that is pleasing and spoken from the heart, it's powerful. I hope each of you on this call have at least at some point experienced it, that someone gave a genuine compliment to you, genuinely said something that was truthful and pleasing to you. How nice that felt. It felt so much like I could do anything, right? Because it showed this person cared about me. So we should try to do that in our life more, like be able to praise others, appreciate others. Often, sometimes it's difficult to praise other people because, we're human beings, a tinge of envy that kind of comes in. Like, if I praise this person, I may not be genuine because I'm actually a little envious of them. Then that doesn't mean we don't praise them. That means we work on our envy. Right? The issue is on us. The issue is not with them. The issue is with us. We need to work on our envious thoughts that we have, but learn to praise people as, because Krishna wants that. Krishna himself here is saying that good speech is something that is pleasing. It is not aggression. It is not anger. It is important for us to do this. Now, I do want to clarify here, and we'll talk about this a little more. Sometimes a question may be asked that, but I have the truth. I know this truth about this person. I know that this truth is required to be said, but it's not going to be pleasing to them. What do I do in this situation? So there is a qualification for explaining the truth that may not be pleasing or agitates the mind, is if you're in a position of authority and if you're genuinely out there to help somebody. Right. So sometimes, for example, some of us may have had to tell our family or friends who eat meat that eating meat is bad for you. And that, that you by eating meat are causing a lot of bad consequences on this planet. Do you think that that was the truth? It is the truth. Do you think it's pleasing for someone to hear? Absolutely not. Does it agitate their mind? Absolutely yes. Was it necessary to be said? Absolutely yes. So sometimes truth may not be pleasing, may not be agitating, right? But this comes down to the next point of speech, which is speech must be beneficial. Hita. So whenever we speak, we need to think, if I am going to tell someone that is truthful and I know it's going to hurt them, then at least am I telling something that's beneficial? If I'm going to tell them something that is not beneficial, and it's just because the truth, I know it's going to hurt them, it's going to agitate their mind. What is the point of me even saying this, right? And this is such an important thing, gauge for us speech. Because it's interesting, like true speech, we all want to speak truly. Like it's ironical that I spend so much time on truth, but we all want to speak truly when it comes to other people. Like I want to tell you the truth, like I want to say, I don't like the color of sari you're wearing, or I don't like, the samosa that you made, or I don't like the, the color of your house, or, I don't like what kind of a phone you have. I don't like the fact that you use an Android phone. Like, we want to be honest with our opinion and share the truth. But if there is no benefit to that, then there is no value in sharing that truth. There is no value in speaking that. And in fact, very often when someone shares the truth without thinking of the benefit to people around them, that causes so much of misery. It causes so much of unnecessary pain of somebody just speaking the truth without thinking of benefits. This is the role of a spiritual master. So very often, and we'll discuss this further because that's what the purport of this verse Prabhupada talks about, is that spiritual master will speak the truth that is going to be harsh. It is going to hurt your feelings. It is going to agitate your mind. But the reason the spiritual master does it is because that's beneficial. Krishna does this in the Gita himself in how he speaks to Arjuna. When Krishna starts conversing with Arjuna in the second chapter, Krishna is very heavy with Arjuna. He says, like, what is wrong with you? What happened to you? You were a great warrior. Like, why are you speaking like, what has this impetus? Why has this impotence befitted you? Or something like that. Like, Krishna is very strong with Arjuna. Like, I mean, obviously, I'm sure Arjuna's feelings were affected, right? And Arjuna was anyway agitated. It was disturbing. But Krishna did that because it was beneficial. So sometimes, and it's not just spiritual masters, right? Most of you on this call are parents, grandparents. Sometimes you may have to discipline your children, your grandchildren, because it's required. that at that point we can't say, I'm just going to say something pleasing to them because I don't want to hurt their feelings. But sometimes the feelings have to be heard for them to grow. I often give this analogy that when a baby is trying to walk, the first time the baby stands up and is trying to walk, it wobbles and it falls down. Imagine if every parent in this world would say, oh my God, my poor baby fell down. I don't want my baby to get hurt. You're never going to walk again. I'm just going to put you on the stroller for the rest of your life because when you walk, you get hurt. Can you imagine what the world would be like? It's like if you've seen the movie WALL-E, it'll be like that. A bunch of people on this automated strollers. But we don't, right? You let someone suffer because that suffering is going to benefit them in the long run. So similarly, as a guru or as an authority or as a teacher, it is okay to speak something that is truthful, but may not necessarily be pleasing or non-agitating if it is beneficial. The tricky part is, how do you know you can do that? Now, if you're a spiritual master, like none of us on this call are initiating gurus. If you're an initiating guru, it's very evident. If you're a Shiksha guru, it's very evident. But in our circle, where we're all peers, how do we know that? How do we know that I should be telling this truth because it's beneficial to them? How do we know that? How do we know how do we know that line to cross or not to cross? So fortunately, Krishna tells that and Prabhupada has said the best thing we can do when it gets confusing is to just speak about Vedic literatures. Swadhyabhyasanam, that Swadhyabhyasanam. Swadhyaya is like study of literature and Abhyasanam is practice. So study. So Prabhupada Krishna clearly says that you should speak about Vedic literatures. The more we take our energy in not necessarily speaking, oh, I'm going to tell this because I think that'll benefit them, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. The more we actually focus on let me talk about Shastra. Let's get together and talk about Shastra. We should, yes, catch up, find out what each of us are doing, but let's talk about Shastra. Let's glorify Krishna. Glorifying Krishna together has so much of potency. Krishna himself says in the Gita, Machita Madgata Prana Bodhayanta Parasparam Katayantas Chamam Nityam Tushyanti Charamanti Cha. Like devotees getting together and glorifying Krishna is so beautiful. It's described that when one utters the name of Krishna, Lord Krishna is dancing on our tongues. Just think about it. The holy name is so potent that just by uttering Krishna, Krishna is dancing on our tongues. So what to speak? Imagine if you're an entire gathering and everybody is saying Krishna's name. We have multiple people dancing on our tongues. So the best way to control our urge to speak is to speak about Krishna. And the beauty about speaking about Krishna is you can't stop talking about Krishna. You literally cannot stop talking. Once you start talking about Krishna, it's like Krishna just takes over your life. You can talk about him all the time. I see speakers, I see devotees like senior devotees who've been in this movement for decades and decades and decades. They can talk about Krishna all the time and they're never tired. You see some, when I was young, and His Holiness Jayapataka Swami his health was very good and he was traveling. There would be days where he'd leave from India early morning. He'd come to Dubai morning time. He'd be in Dubai for a layover for 4 or 5 hours, and he'll do a quick class, and then he'd fly to Europe, and then he'll do another class in Europe, and then he'd fly to US, come to US, which is final destination, give another class there. So in a single day, he's given 4 classes in 3 different continents and 4 different countries. That's because he's speaking about Krishna. Because when you speak about Krishna, it's like you can speak all the time. Krishna's, because there is a multitude of things you can talk about Krishna, right? We're noticing that in Krishna book. We have only gone through 31 chapters of Krishna book, and still there's 60 more chapters glorifying Krishna. And Krishna book only focuses on Krishna's pastimes. It doesn't focus on side pastimes that took place in Mahabharata where Krishna was really involved. It doesn't even talk about that. So when you extend all of this, imagine how much is there to talk about the Lord. And then you extend this to other incarnations, to Nashinga, to Lord Ram, Mahaprabhu, and then devotees of Krishna. So you can fill your entire desire to speak, your entire freedom of speech by just talking about Krishna. So there's no need to talk about anything else. You can just focus on Krishna. And that is what happens. This is how our tongue is getting engaged in the right way. So in Vacha Vega Manasu Krodha Vegam verse, in the purport, the Prabhupada clarifies that the control of speech that is being requested is only for mundane talk. But when it comes to glorification of Krishna, there is no control. We can talk about Krishna all the time, and we should. So we should divert our tendency of wanting to talk on material things towards Krishna. This is explained in Srimad Bhagavatam verses 1, 5, 10, and 11. 1, 5, 10 is Nayad Vachas Chitrapadam Hare Yasho Jagat Pavitram Praganita Karhichit Tadvayasam Tirtham Ushanti Manasa Nayatra Hamsa Niramanti Usikshaha. Those words which do not describe the glories of the Lord, who alone can sanctify the atmosphere of the whole universe, are considered by saintly persons to be like unto a place of pilgrimage for crows. Think about this. Crows are like just random birds that exist somewhere. So if the words are not used to glorify Krishna, those are described like something that crows would get attracted to. Since all perfect persons are inhabitants of the transcendental abode, they do not derive any pleasure there. And then in the next verse, so the first verse here is described, Sutta Goswami is talking about of things that are not related to Krishna. And then the next verse, he talks about things that are related to Krishna. Tadvak visargo janataga viplavo yasmin pratishlokam abhatyavati api namnyani anantasya yasho nikatani yat shinvanti gayanti grananti sadhava. Shinvanti gayanti grananti sadhava. This is such an important point. The translation is so stunning. On the other hand, the literature, which is full of descriptions of the personal transcendental glories of the name, fame, forms, pastimes of the unlimited Supreme Lord, is a different creation full of transcendental words directed towards bringing about a revolution in the impious lives of this world's misdirected civilization. Such transcendental literatures, even though imperfectly composed, are heard, sung, and accepted by purified men who are thoroughly honest. So this is such a wonderful way for us to engage our urge of speaking. And we should, endeavor to use our speaking power to speak solely about Krishna as much as we can. So in summary, the 5 elements of good speech is that speech should not create agitation in the minds of others. Our speech should be truthful. Our speech should be pleasing. Speech should benefit everyone. And we should use our faculty of speech for chanting, speaking, hearing, whatever we can do related to Krishna. So this is important for us to think that, right? Like before we ever speak, we need to think, whatever am I speaking, does it fit in this categories or not? Like it's a common saying, right? Think before you speak. So that think before you speak, this is telling you what you need to be thinking about. Because very often when people say think before you speak, they don't really tell you what you need to think. Here, this is your benchmark. Like when I'm speaking something, does it fit within this category? If it doesn't fit within this category, then I probably don't need to say it, right? And this is where freedom is. Practice freedom by control. Those people sometimes who don't voice their opinion on something are also practicing their freedom by controlling. So freedom doesn't necessarily mean just being able to do everything. Not doing something is also freedom. It's a choice here. So we can practice freedom by control here, particularly as we relate to devotees. According to Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Krishna reveals himself to one who practices such conditioning of the tongue, like who practices this control of the tongue. No one can understand Krishna as he is by the blunt material senses, but he reveals himself to those devotees, being pleased with them for their transcendental loving service, which begins with the tongue. So Krishna, just as the way if we control our tongue, Krishna reveals himself through the tongue as well. That's why I said we chant Krishna's name, Krishna dances on it. Kind of what we spoke about again, right? We spoke about this guidelines is for us. Like we should follow this as much as we can. But when it comes to spiritual masters and people in position of authority, they practice austerity of speech slightly differently than we do. So this purport to this verse, Prabhupada says, one should not speak in such a way as to agitate the minds of others. Of course, when a teacher speaks, he can speak the truth for the instruction of his students, but such a teacher should not speak to those who are not his students, and he will agitate their minds. This is penance as far as talking is concerned. Besides that, one should not talk nonsense. The process of speaking in spiritual circles is to say something upheld by the scriptures. One should at once quote from spiritual authority to back up what he is saying. At the same time, such talk should be very pleasurable to the ear. By such discussions, one may derive the highest benefit and elevate human society. There is limitless talk of Vedic literature, and one should study this. This is called penance of speech. So very beautifully Prabhupada explained to us how do we control our speech here. So we all established we like to speak, we're given rights by the government that we can speak whatever we want to speak. And then, but our acharyas have told us that, we should control what we speak, because if we just speak everything and everything, if it's not anything and everything, if it's not beneficial, it doesn't fit into these categories, it, defeats the purpose. And we found out the easiest way to engage our senses of speech is to speak about Krishna. So a good way for us to engage our speak is, whoever you meet, talk to them about Krishna. Share with them about Krishna, with your own families. There is no namna makari bahuda sarva shakti. There's no hard and fast rules for chanting the holy names of the Lord. So spread this name of Krishna to whoever we see, whoever we meet. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, "Yare dekho tare kaho Krishna upadesh. Amara agnyaya guru hana tara edesh." Like Mahaprabhu himself is saying, instruct everyone to follow the orders of Lord Shri Krishna as stated in the Bhagavad-Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. In this way, become a spiritual master and try to liberate everyone in this land. So we're getting our instructions from our acharyas that are telling us that when we control our urge to speak and channel our urge to speak, dovetail our urge to speak towards Krishna, we are truly, truly free, and we're truly able to get the nectar of freedom of speech. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji, thank you very much for the spectacular class, very relevant in today's context. Devotees, if you would like to ask Mataji any questions, please unmute yourself. You can also post your questions on the chat window.
Mataji, for a very beautiful talk, very instructive. It's not easy to decide whether something is going to be upsetting to another person. And Prabhupada mentioned about if we just talk about Krishna, there are people who don't like to hear about Krishna. That is also upsetting to them. So it's very judgmental thing as to what is going to be upsetting and what is not going to be upsetting to the others. Krishna, when he chastised Arjuna, it was after Arjuna became his disciple. So when a guru talks to, and Prabhupada made this very, very clear, you made that point very clear, that once the guru as the disciple, he can tell the disciple what is right, what is wrong. But Prabhupada also mentioned that you cannot say that to somebody who is not your disciple, who is not surrendered to you. So these are very nice points that you brought out. I thank you very much for a very nice talk. And by the way, I like my shirt.
I'm Gaku. I like your shirt too. Thank you for saying that, Prabhu. It's a really important point about that you mentioned here, that sometimes even when we want to speak about Krishna to other people, that agitates them, right? But I've often thought about this once, like, why do people get agitated when you talk about God? And it really comes down to, for me, feeling like, I think people within their heart know that they need to surrender to a higher being, but to surrender is a very hard thing. To surrender is acknowledging that someone is superior to me. So I think that's what agitates people, because they don't, we don't want to surrender to something as someone supreme. But it's true. But sometimes you have to ruffle the feathers, right? You look at Srila Prabhupada. Like, Srila Prabhupada agitated so many people. People were not wanting to listen to him, but Prabhupada persevered because he knew what he was saying was right. So sometimes, that confidence that I know what I'm saying is right comes from our faith in Krishna. Like, if we are convinced that this is the truth and this is going to be beneficial to people, even though you're put in excruciating circumstances, you don't change that principle of wanting to speak. That I feel is very, that's the mercy Krishna gives us. So thank you for sharing that. This verse is so beautiful. The very small purport, but it's such a powerful, powerful purport.
Whenever Prabhupada answered to people who ask him questions where there's some conflicting thing, he really puts it in a way that makes you think. And that comes with practice. It doesn't come overnight. And we need to strive for that. How do we make our answers palatable to the opposite party? That's not easy. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji, I have a question. You mentioned about the situation where sometimes we may be harboring ill feelings towards a particular devotee, sometimes directly or in a subtle way. And one of the solutions you gave was we can glorify Krishna together with them. But how do we take the first step? Sometimes we may not even want to start that initial dialogue with them. So how do we get that initial conversation going so that we can chant together or read Krishna Katha together?
It's a great point, Prabhu. I can't, what I will share as an answer is just by experience. I don't have a shastric answer for that. But, our leaders have recommended that when you are in this position of conflict, whether it is overt or covert, like people don't know, or it's subtle conflict, depending on the volume of that conflict, either you want to address it before you read Shastra together. So it's done in association of a third party, another senior devotee who will help you voice your truth, but in a safe space. Sometimes that's what actually happens with even voicing truth, right? Very often between devotees, when you're offended, somebody said something, and sometimes it's a small offense that you can just ask. Sometimes you may not even realize you're offending that person, right? But if the other person is very deeply offended, if they come and just tell you, oh, I was so offended, da, 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 then you get offended and the cycle of offense continues. So these kind of conversations, when it's done with a third party mediator, it helps, because that third person is able to break that. Hey, listen, like this wasn't their intention. This wasn't their intention. Let's move on. But if it's something small, I was referring to something small. Like sometimes you just had like, what, I'm really like not feeling good vibes towards this devotee, but I know that they're a Vaishnava. I want to respect them. Let me just reach out to them and say, hey, would you like to read together, right? Would you like to, let's maybe chant together. Let's do something together. Because then that neutralizes, because then your focus becomes Krishna. You take away from each other, focus becomes Krishna. So it does help resolve small conflicts. I have had this personal experience in my life where I've had some devotees with whom it was a very minor, it wasn't like a massive conflict, it was just disagreement on something. And she reached out to me and said, listen, do you want to just read together? And I was like, yeah, okay, sure. It was, and I was upset with her. I didn't know she was upset with me too. But then later, when we started reading together, then we came to a point where we actually read, I forget which book it was, but there was a conversation that talked about devotee relationships. And then she told me, I was upset with what you said. And I was like, oh, I was upset. But the conversation was so mature because we were now discussing Shastra. Like we weren't talking about like, oh, I was so upset, you did this. It was like, let's talk about Shastra. So that helps us actually. There's a lot of power in scripture. Where was I hearing this? Somewhere about how when we read scriptures together, sometimes answers to our questions that are within our heart get answered by what we read. So sometimes, especially when you have enmity towards somebody else, just by reading, that will get addressed. I mean, I've seen it happen in my life. So I have very, very strong faith that Prabhupada's books, Krishna's teachings are universal, and you don't know the answer to a question you had in life is there. So when you do it together, it addresses, it helps. And the other thing is also like genuinely being able to like stop for a moment, and even when you have an issue with a devotee, like putting stuff aside and thinking, okay, there has to be some good in them. If somebody is dedicating their life to serve Krishna, there has to be something good in them. So yes, this person has, it's hard. It is very hard. What I'm saying right now, I myself struggle to practice. This is the ideal standard, right? But we have to be able to put aside our ill feeling towards them and then focus on the goodness in them. Focus on that goodness in them. And then you know what happens? It's something magical happens. If you forgo that they did this to offend me or they did this wrong in my life, and focus on the positivity, focus on, I want to, I still care for you, you're a devotee, I want the betterment in your Krishna consciousness, and you take to the next level of wanting to communicate with them, wanting to do it. After time, the other person, if they're also a devotee, their heart will also melt. And like Krishna will then reveal to them. So it's like that fixes itself. but we have to take the first step. Like we have to put aside our thing. Very often when we are to your question, back to your question that it's hard to take the first step, it's because our ego is telling us that, well, I'm not wrong, they're wrong. Why should I be the first person to do this? But this is a lesson for us that we sometimes we have to put aside our ego and focus on, well, let's talk about Krishna together, right? So I don't know the answer to your question. It's just.
Thank you very much, Mataji, for those very practical answers for the question. Very much applicable in everyday's activity, every situation. Thank you very much.
I'll just share something.
All the way to Golok Vrindavan.
Okay, is this any better?
Still, we are hearing the echo, Ramajay Prabhu.
So Ramajay Prabhu, in your house, multiple computers are used. The one computer should leave audio. So
Okay, let's try this.
Avoid
Is this
the
any
echo.
better?
That's good. Yes, that's good, Prabhu.
Okay. So just one something I heard this morning in Mukunda Prabhu's class, similar question that Gopal Chandra Prabhu asked. And Prabhu answered it a little bit differently, but I felt that it's another perspective. What Prabhu said basically is when the conflicts happen, it's not about who is right and who is wrong. It's our focus needs to be on, well, the practical tips he did was like how to maintain the relationship. And it is with utmost respect from both parties. And then he also mentioned that when you have utmost respect, it doesn't mean that you have to have a close relationship. And it also doesn't mean that you have a totally cut off relationship. When you face somebody face to face, you should offer dandavats. You should, offer respects that way. But you can also keep distance because, it could also be considered that somebody is in Radharani's camp and somebody is in Chandravali's camp. But ultimately, both the camps love Krishna, right? So ultimately, everybody is trying to come closer to Krishna. The goal is the same. The ways might be different, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that there should be animosity, right? There could be distance, just like Chandravali's camp has a distance, right, with Radharani's camp. So that is another perspective to look at it that way. That practically we can always respect others. We can keep a safe distance and offer all respects, but at the same time appreciate that everybody is working towards getting to the end goal, which is the same for everybody.
Thank you for sharing that, Ramji. It was really beautiful. It's coming back to the point of keeping Krishna in the center. The more we keep Krishna in the center and not us in the center, it addresses some of these conflicts. Because you're right, both Radharani's camp and Chandravali's camp both have Krishna in the center. So,
dear devotees, are there any more questions? I see a lot of kids on the call today. Anybody would like to ask any question to Mataji? If so, please unmute yourself.
they've heard me for 1 extra hour longer than all the talks. So I think that they're pretty tired of hearing me talk. So it's all good. If there are no questions or comments, I forgot to mention one thing when I was speaking today. I want to give, we do this, Kriti and I do this for our teenagers. We give them homework assignment. But today I want to take the liberty of giving all of you homework assignments is take some time today to appreciate somebody that you haven't. Someone that you may either they may be in your house that you take for granted, or some person you haven't spoken to in a long time, but they mean a lot to you. Take a moment today to appreciate them, send them a note, a text or something, because it's very important. That nature of saying things that please people, it is very powerful. So please take a moment today. If I could humbly recommend all of you to send a word of appreciation to somebody.
Hare Krishna Mataji, if I can take a liberty to ask a question.
Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah, I didn't ask earlier. So, they're just saying that, Satyam Briyat, Priyam Briyat, say truth, but, it should be pleasant, as you said. But, in real life, especially, when you deal with the material, environment, your co-workers, your colleagues, your, people that you deal with, on a day-to-day basis, And sometime, like when you are super nice and, tell the truth and not offend someone, but, if that doesn't help or that doesn't serve the purpose, especially in the role that you are, then you have to take a stand and you have to be firm and be more definitive. And, then you have to tell somebody that, so it's not entirely under your control as a, somebody who is giving out the message, but the person who receives it. And that person, takes it in a good way or in a negative way, or the difference, the impact on that person, which may not be under your control. So the perspicacity, how perspicacious that person is, the individual, and receptive to your message. So sometimes that's a dilemma, like when we meet with the people, we say like lead by example, do good things, but then the person on the other side is not very kind and very receptive. So how to address that? Diplomatically, people say that okay, don't talk much, don't say things that can make things worse. So just thank you, Mataji.
It's a great question, Prabhu. And it's like Krishna knows that, right? That's why austerity of speech, one of it is hitam also, which is beneficial. So to say truth that is beneficial to somebody there's nothing wrong in it. You should, even though that may not be pleasing for them, it's required, right? As parents, I'm sure you have to do that to your children, right? Like sometimes you have to tell them that's not pleasing to them. I don't know what time Aparajit and Krishav like to sleep, but if they want to stay awake until midnight, you may have to tell them that you cannot stay awake until midnight because I will reduce your screen time privileges the next day. Truthful, is it pleasing to them? Absolutely not. Is it beneficial? Yeah, it helped them, right? So this is why these principles, and when Prabhupada was talking about guru, this applies even to people in authority positions. If you're in an authoritative position and you have a relationship with somebody, it is okay to say things that are truthful, even though that may be beneficial for them and they may not see that, right? But in general rule, if you don't have a relationship with somebody and you're just trying to speak, in general, you shouldn't say things that can hurt them. You have to say things that are pleasing and that are, so that's a higher privilege there, right? Because if I don't have a relationship with you, like again, I picked on Vaikuntesha Balaji Prabhu. If I see somebody on the street, right, and they're wearing a t-shirt that I really don't like I like Marvel Comics, they're wearing a t-shirt of DC Comics, I don't like their t-shirt. I don't know who they are. So I'm not going to walk up to them and say, you know what, I think Marvel is better than DC, even though that's the truth. I'm not going to do that to them because there's no benefit to them of me saying this. There's no benefit to me. I have no relationship with them, right? But then if I see somebody that I know, not in Marvel shit, if I see somebody that I know and they're doing something wrong, and that, if I tell them that, hey, I think what you're doing is wrong, they may not like it sometimes, but it's beneficial to them. But I have a relationship with them. So our conversations have to change based on our relationship. The problem is we do the same conversation irrespective of relationship. So to your point, sometimes at work, you can't be pleasing all the time. It's not going to happen. You say sometimes stuff that hurts some people, but the question is your intention to hurt them? Are you intentionally saying something to hurt somebody, or are you saying something that's beneficial that they may not realize it, but it's going to benefit them in the long run, right? Like when a doctor tells you need to change your diet because it's like the doctors, and it may hurt you, but the doctor is not telling that to you to hurt you, right? They're telling you because they're in that position of authority, and they know that even though they're going to say something that's going to hurt you, it's going to help you in the long run. But they have confidence that it is going to help them in the long run. So we have to have that confidence. If we don't have confidence that if by us telling a truth to somebody, it is going to help them in the long run, then better we not say it at that point. But at work, we have to. It happens all the time. Like, and at work, actually, to be honest, truthfulness is a quality that you see least at work, because people don't want to tell people reality, right? Especially like people sometimes are either too afraid, they want to be too politically correct. Like people don't. But if by saying truth it benefits somebody, we have to do that. It's required. But we have to be very confident that it is going to benefit. If we are not confident, better not say anything at all. It's better for us not to say anything at all. I don't know if that answered your question, Prabhu.
Yes, Mataji. Yeah, thank you, Mataji. Yeah.
No problem. And I do hope Krishna and Aparajit go to bed at their.
Yeah, they're listening, Mataji, so hopefully that will help too. Thank you. You're very attentive.
Hare Krishna Mataji. Some thoughts that came to me in today's lecture, and thank you very much for the wonderful class. The 2 points that stood up for me was like truthfulness, and it has to be pleasing to others, which sometimes cannot go together, right? It depends on how the other person receives it. But this goes back to my recollection where I was like listening Prabhupada's videos, and he was having some of the debate with the Western community where somebody was challenging on cow slaughter, where they debate like it is giving food, why don't we kill? And Prabhupada gives so much pleasing answer to them, stating that cow is like a mother, she gives milk. Do you kill your mother? That was the question he asked them. So it is like you have to tell them in a pleasing way. But what I got from that lecture was Prabhupada is so spirited soul, like he has so in-depth knowledge. If the person goes to that level of knowledge, that's where you can kind of give the answers in such a way. But you need to be having so much knowledge, then you would be able to go into that kind of conversation. Hare Krishna. Just thought of sharing.
Thank you, Sudhakar Prabhu. Actually, on that note of Prabhupada, you see that very often. Like Prabhupada was so pleasing the way he spoke to people. He would say truthful things, but he could be forceful, but he was so pleasing. So many devotees, disciples of Sri Prabhupada, share how it was when their parents first met Prabhupada. And many of them were not sure how Prabhupada would receive their parents or how their parents would receive Prabhupada. And almost every instance that I have at least come across, it has been very favorable. Like, Prabhupada handled the parents so nicely, was so appreciative of them. He was telling the truth of when he was appreciating the contributions of the disciples, and people were so happy. Like they gave up their kids to Prabhupada. And that's Sudhakar, to your point, sometimes I think that we get afraid to, this is a very, going into a different level, but sometimes I think we get afraid to tell the truth because we know it will be pleasing to somebody, right? We know that sometimes if I tell, because again, our ego is stopping us from praising somebody, appreciating somebody, because it is the truth. But we have, so we go the other way also. Sometimes we don't want to tell the truth because it's going to upset. Sometimes we don't want to tell the truth because it's going to praise them. So we don't do anything, which is also problematic. So this is giving us guidelines. Anytime we speak, like, where do I fall in this spectrum? And that is a very beautiful conversation of Srila Prabhupada. I think it's Cardinal something. It's a French Cardinal. Phenomenal conversation. It's on YouTube. Highly recommend devotees to watch it. Like, Prabhupada is just such a special conversation. Very, very long. It's 20-30 minutes long. Very nice.
Thank you, Mataji.
Thank you.
Devotees, we have time for one more question. If anybody would like to ask or share your thoughts from today's class.
It's something, and that is the reason we quite often at a loss as to how to start conversation when you are a supervisor. This is with regard to Mani Prabhu's question, and that is we have ego, false ego, and we try to think ourselves that how am I going to solve this? But if we think that Krishna, you will help me say what the right thing, that would help. So before you start conversation, think that I have no answers. Only you, Krishna, can answer these questions for me. And you go with that surrender to Krishna, things will just work out fine. So that is one way to look at it, that to set aside your false ego, surrender to Krishna by saying that I have no answers except through you, and that will help. Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji. Okay, devotees, with that, we have come to the end of the session. Thank you again, Mataji, for that extremely wonderful class. Again, very practical in today's context. And oftentimes we take this freedom of speech very casually, and in the process, we end up hurting others. But today's class is a strong reminder on how we can regulate our speech so that it's beneficial not only for us, but for others also. Thank you again. Thank you all the devotees for joining today. With that, we will move on to some announcements. Let me share my screen. Please let me know if you can see it. Okay, can you see it? Okay. Thank you, Mahasundari Mataji, again for the wonderful class. And thanks again, devotees, for joining today. We would also like to take this opportunity to thank all the monthly donors for your continued support. Even though the temple has been closed for the last 3-4 months, still we have to pay the mortgage, the monthly mortgage, which is a huge chunk in our expense. And thanks to all of you for contributing month after month so that we can make that payment. There is still some shortage. And if anybody would like to donate, whether it is $5, $10 a month, again, no amount is small. But if you're interested in contributing, please let us know. You can talk to myself or Sakshi Gauranga Prabhu for that. And also, if you haven't subscribed to any of your distribution list, we are available through WhatsApp, email, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Please let us know. We'll add you to those so you can get the notifications of the different programs. Also, with the COVID situation getting worse day by day in US and in Texas specifically, we request and also pray that all the devotees are following the CDC guidelines and taking the right precautions so you're staying safe and healthy in your homes. The Krishna book reading challenge continues, and in the last few sessions, we've been enjoying the Rasalila dance and also understanding the philosophical significance of it. So there are still a few open slots available. If you like to sign up, please do so in the given link there. This happens every Tuesday and Friday at 8 o'clock in the evening. Lastly, Srila Prabhupada would say books are the basis. And here in our congregation, thanks to the tireless efforts of Mahasundari Mataji and Rupsagar Prabhu, we are doing our little bit. We are trying our best effort to place these books in different libraries, bookstores, and so forth. Thanks again to the efforts of Mahasundari Mataji and Rupsagar Prabhu. So how we can help this endeavor? So either we can buy these books and give to our friends or family members, or we can study ourselves because as they say, known is a drop, but unknown is an ocean. So we can get more books and study, get deeper in our Krishna consciousness. Or we can also sponsor a book box so that they can be placed in hotels, airports, and libraries, and so forth. Or we can do all of the three. So if you like to do any of this, please reach out to Mahasundari Mataji. Thank you again, devotees. With that, we will move to Narsingha prayers, and Ishan today will be leading the prayer for us. Ishan, are you there?
Narsingha prayers, Prabhu. I forgot to mention this earlier. So as many devotees may know, Ravi Kiran Prabhu and their family had to move back to India. So Prabhu and family had to leave a few weeks. I think they left last week or earlier this past week. So today when we chant Narsingha prayers, please chant for their family as they're getting resettled in a new city. So, you know, we will really miss them and their active service that they've done in this congregation. So please say some prayers for them today.
Thank you, Mataji, for reminding that. Thank you. So with that, Ishan, can you please come a little bit closer?
Hi, Bo, can you hear me now?
Yes, Ishan, and please sing a little louder.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Namaste Narasimhaya. Namaste Narasimhaya. Jala jala
Jaya Prabhupada.
नरसिंह भगवान की जय, प्रहलाद
Maharaj ki jai. Or
Thank you.
Premanande.
Hari Hari Bol. Thank you, Ishan, and all of Krishna.